I watched her stir my coffee twice. Once, then a pause, then again. A deliberate motion as something from her purse dissolved into the dark liquid. My daughter-in-law's smile never faltered. "Drink up, Beatrice," she said, sliding the cup toward me. "It'll help you sleep." That's when I knew with absolute certainty that the woman my son had married was trying to kill me. Not quickly, not violently, but with the same patient precision she applied to everything else in her carefully constructed life. The house was quiet that afternoon, too quiet, the kind of silence that falls when someone is waiting for something to happen. I remember how the September light slanted through my kitchen windows, the windows Roy had installed with his own hands 43 years ago. I remember the weight of the porcelain cup between my fingers, still warm, and I remember thinking, this is the moment I decide whether I live or die. Let me tell you how I got here. My name is Beatrice Miller. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house my husband built before he died. It sits on a hill overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. Every morning, I wake up to a view that still takes my breath away, even after all these years. The mist rises from the valleys like spirits returning home. The wind whispers through the pines with a soft, steady rhythm that sounds like breathing. Roy and I bought this land when we were barely 25. Everyone said we were crazy. Too remote, they said. Too much work. But Roy just laughed. "Bee," he'd say, "some people spend their whole lives looking for a view like this." He was right. He spent 7 years building our home piece by piece, working evenings and weekends while holding down his job at the lumber mill. Every nail, every board, every window, his hands touched it all. When he died last year from a heart attack that came without warning, I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. This house wasn't just wood and glass. It was Roy's heart made visible. Our son Derek was 44 when Roy died. He'd always been the gentle one. Too gentle, sometimes. The kind of man who believed everyone had good intentions. The kind who couldn't see the shadows behind certain smiles. He'd married Vivian 15 years ago, after a whirlwind romance that left him breathless and me uneasy. "She makes me happy, Mom," he'd said, his eyes bright with the particular blindness that comes with new love. I smiled and hugged him and said all the right things, but something in Vivian's eyes, a calculation, a coldness, made me hold my tongue about the rest. From the beginning, there was something about Vivian that didn't fit. She was beautiful in that careful, constructed way, always perfectly dressed, perfectly made up, perfectly pleasant, but there was an emptiness behind her smile, a hollowness in her laugh. She watched people like they were pieces on a chessboard, waiting to be moved. They had one child, Chloe, 12 years old now, with Derek's gentle eyes and a quietness that sometimes worried me. Vivian kept her close, too close. "Children need boundaries," she would say whenever Chloe tried to express herself. I watched my granddaughter grow smaller in her presence, like a flower closing at dusk. After Roy died, I noticed the changes, small at first, then more obvious. Derek's visits became less frequent, his calls shorter. When I phoned their house, Vivian always answered. "He's resting," she'd say, or "he's working late." Always an excuse, always that same measured voice, like honey poured over ice. 3 months after the funeral, Derek showed up alone. It was unusual. Vivian had rarely let him out of her sight since they'd married. He sat on Roy's old leather chair, the one I couldn't bear to move, and didn't look me in the eye. "Mom," he said finally, his voice tight, "we need to talk about the house." The air seemed to thicken around us. I knew what was coming before he said another word. We think, it might be too much for you now, this big place, all alone." His fingers twisted together, a nervous habit from childhood. "We could help you find somewhere smaller, more manageable." "This is my home, Derek," I said quietly. He nodded too quickly. "Of course it is. But Vivian's worried about you. She says you've been repeating yourself lately, forgetting things." My heart stuttered. "That's not true." Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. "She says it's natural. At your age." "At my age." as if 67 made me incapable, as if grief didn't sometimes muddle the mind temporarily. "I'm fine, Derek." He sighed, shoulders slumping. "Just think about it, okay? For me?" Before he left, he hugged me, a quick, awkward embrace that felt like goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch watching the distant lights of town flicker like earthbound stars. Roy and I used to sit here together, planning our future. Now I sat alone, wondering if I had one. 2 weeks passed without a word from Derek. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Vivian arrived unannounced. She stood on my doorstep holding a cake, her smile bright and brittle. "I thought we could talk, just us girls," she said, brushing past me into the house. "Clear the air." I followed her into my kitchen, watching as she set down the cake and began opening cupboards like she owned them. She found the plates, the forks, the coffee mugs, moving through my space with a familiarity that felt invasive. "Derek's been so worried about you," she said, filling the kettle. "We both have." "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, sitting at the table. "There's nothing to worry about." Vivian's smile tightened. "Beatrice, there's no shame in admitting when things become too difficult. This house, it's a lot for anyone to manage, let alone someone alone." "Roy built this house," I said, "every inch of it. And it's lovely," she said, her voice softening to something almost convincing. "But Roy would want you to be practical, to be safe." The kettle whistled. Vivian turned away to prepare our coffee. I watched her reflection in the window above the sink, the precise movements of her hands, the slight frown of concentration, and then I saw it. As she stirred my cup, her right hand dipped into her pocket. Something small dropped into my coffee. She stirred again, making sure it dissolved. My mouth went dry, my heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face neutral when she turned, carrying the cups to the table. "Here we are," she said, placing mine in front of me. "Just how you like it." I wrapped my fingers around the warm ceramic, but didn't lift it. "Thank you." She watched me, her head tilted slightly. "Aren't you going to drink it? It'll get cold." I forced a smile. "In a minute. Tell me about Chloe first. How is school going?" Vivian launched into a carefully edited account of my granddaughter's life. All achievements and no personality, as if Chloe were a resume rather than a child. I nodded and murmured in the right places, all while my mind raced. What did she put in my coffee? Why? Eventually, I lifted the cup to my lips and pretended to sip. Then, when Vivian looked away to cut the cake, I poured a little into the potted plant beside me. I repeated this charade throughout our conversation, watching as Vivian grew increasingly satisfied. Within 30 minutes, I began to act drowsy. It wasn't difficult. The fear and shock provided their own kind of exhaustion. "Oh dear," Vivian said, her concern as practiced as a theater performance. "You look tired. Perhaps you should lie down." I nodded, letting my eyelids droop. "I do feel strange, a bit dizzy." "Let me help you to bed," she offered, taking my arm. Her grip was firm, controlling. I let her lead me to my bedroom, where she eased me onto the mattress with surprising strength. "You rest now. I'll clean up in the kitchen." I closed my eyes, keeping my breathing deep and even. Through slitted eyelids, I watched her stand in the doorway, observing me for a long moment before turning away. Her footsteps retreated down the hall, but she didn't return to the kitchen. Instead, I heard the subtle creak of Roy's office door opening. For 20 minutes, I lay there, listening to the distant sounds of drawers opening, papers rustling. When the noises stopped, I waited another 5 minutes before silently rising from the bed. My legs trembled as I crept to the doorway and peered out. Vivian stood at my dining room table, my financial documents spread before her, my will, my bank statements, the deed to the house. She was photographing them with her phone, her movements quick and efficient. I retreated to the bed, my mind spinning. When she checked on me 10 minutes later, I was lying exactly as she'd left me, eyes closed, breathing steady. I heard her satisfied sigh. "Sleep well, Beatrice," she whispered, and there was something in her voice, a note of finality, that chilled me to the bone. After the front door closed and her car pulled away, I forced myself up. My hands shook as I gathered the coffee cups, carefully preserving what remained in mine. The plant I'd poured some into already looked wilted, its leaves curling at the edges. I locked every door and window that night, something I'd rarely done when Roy was alive. As darkness fell over the mountains, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, trying to make sense of what had happened. Vivian wanted my house. That much was clear. But drugging me? Searching through my private papers? This went beyond simple greed. There was a calculation to it, a patience that frightened me more than any sudden violence could have. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every creak of the old house made me start. Every shadow seemed threatening. By morning, exhaustion had crystallized into resolution. I would not be driven from my home. I would not be made to disappear. First, I called my bank and changed all my passwords and security questions. Then I found a locksmith in the yellow pages. The actual paper book, not online where searches could be tracked. By afternoon, I had new locks on every door. The coffee cups I sealed in plastic bags and hid in the back of my freezer. Evidence, though I wasn't sure yet how I would use it. Next, I called Derek. Vivian answered. "He's not available right now," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "Can I take a message?" "Just tell him I called," I replied, trying to match her calm. "Tell him I miss him." "Of course," she said, and I knew she would tell him nothing. That night, I made a decision. If I was going to protect myself, I needed to understand what I was facing, and to do that, I needed help. The next morning, I drove into town and parked outside the law offices of Brennan & Associates. I'd chosen them because they had no connection to my family. No chance Vivian would know them or have influence there. The receptionist looked surprised when I asked to speak with someone about elder law. Perhaps it was my appearance. I'd dressed carefully in clothes that conveyed competence, not fragility. Or perhaps it was the determination in my voice. Iris Brennan was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened without interruption as I explained my situation: the house, Derek's sudden pressure to sell, Vivian's unexpected visit, the drug coffee. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Mrs. Miller, what you're describing is very serious. If someone is attempting to administer substances without your knowledge, that's assault, possibly attempted murder, depending on what was used." The word murder hung in the air between us. Until she said it, I hadn't allowed myself to think it so plainly. "I don't have proof," I admitted, "just what I saw in the reflection." Iris nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need evidence. Do you still have the coffee? Cup?" "Yes, and some of the liquid." "Good, we'll have it analyzed." She made a note. "In the meantime, I suggest you install security cameras, discreetly, and keep a detailed journal of every interaction with your daughter-in-law and son." I hesitated. "My son, I don't think he knows what she's doing." Iris's expression softened slightly. "That may be true, but right now, we need to focus on your safety." She slid a business card across the desk. "Call me anytime, day or night." As I left her office, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I was no longer alone with my fear. Heavier because giving it voice had made it more real. That afternoon, I purchased 2 small cameras disguised as clock radios and installed them in my living room and kitchen. I bought a new phone that Vivian didn't know about, and I started my journal, recording everything I could remember about the past few months, every conversation, every strange occurrence, every uneasy feeling. 3 days later, Derek called. His voice sounded strained, distant. "Mom, are you okay? Vivian said you seemed confused when she visited." My grip tightened on the phone. "I'm perfectly fine, Derek. When are you coming to see me?" A pause. "I've been busy with work, maybe next week?" "I'd like that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I miss you." Another pause, longer this time. "I miss you too, Mom." Something in his tone, a sadness, a resignation, made my chest ache. "Derek," I said carefully, "is everything all right at home?" "Everything's fine," he answered too quickly. "Listen, I have to go. I'll call you soon." After he hung up, I sat staring at the phone. There had been a time when Derek told me everything, when he sought my advice, shared his worries. Now there was a wall between us, a wall named Vivian. The next week passed without a visit from Derek. I used the time to prepare. I moved important documents to a safe deposit box at the bank. I wrote down every account number, every password. I made copies of photos, of letters, of memories that couldn't be replaced. And I waited. Vivian returned on a Thursday, this time with Chloe in tow. My granddaughter looked pale, thinner than I remembered. Her eyes darted nervously between her mother and me. "We thought we'd check on you," Vivian announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Chloe's been worried about her grandmother." Chloe gave me a quick, tight hug. As she pulled away, she slipped something into my hand, a folded piece of paper. I tucked it into my pocket without looking at it. "I'm so glad to see you both," I said, leading them into the kitchen where my hidden camera would record everything. "Would you like some tea?" Vivian smiled. "That would be lovely. I'll help." I watched her carefully as we prepared the tea. This time, she made no move to tamper with my cup. Perhaps she suspected I was on to her, or perhaps she had another plan. As we sat at the table, Vivian dominated the conversation, speaking about Derek's work stress, about home renovations, about everything except what mattered. Chloe remained silent, picking at the cookie on her plate without eating it. When Vivian excused herself to use the bathroom, I turned to Chloe. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I whispered. She glanced toward the hallway, then nodded quickly. "Read my note later," she murmured. "When we're gone." Before I could respond, Vivian returned. Her smile never reached her eyes. "We should be going," she announced. "Derek will be home soon and I need to start dinner." At the door, Chloe hugged me again, longer this time. "I love you, Grandma," she said, her voice small but fierce. "I love you too, my brave girl," I replied, smoothing her hair. After they left, I unfolded Chloe's note with trembling fingers. In careful, childish handwriting, it read, "Dad is sick a lot. Mom gives him pills and his food. She says you're next. Be careful." My blood turned to ice. I read the note 3 times, then burned it in the sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. That night, I called Iris and told her about the note. Her voice was grave when she responded. "This changes things, Beatrice. If your son is being drugged, he's in immediate danger. And so is your granddaughter, being in that environment." "What should I do?" I asked, staring out at the darkness beyond my windows. "We need to move quickly," she said. "I'll contact a private investigator I trust, and we'll need to get that coffee analyzed as soon as possible." The next morning, I delivered the sealed coffee cup to a laboratory Iris had recommended. 3 days later, the results came back. The coffee contained a significant dose of lorazepam, a sedative that could cause confusion, memory problems, and unconsciousness when combined with other medications. Iris filed for an emergency hearing based on the evidence. But before the court date arrived, Derek appeared at my door. He looked terrible, gaunt with dark circles under his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he stood on my porch. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I pulled him into a hug, feeling the bones of his shoulders through his shirt. Of course, always. In the living room, he sank onto the couch like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. I sat beside him, taking his cold hands in mine. "Derek, what's happening to you?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know, Mom. I've been sick, tired all the time. The doctor says it's stress, but the medication isn't helping. It's making things worse." "What medication?" I asked carefully. "Vivian handles all that," he said, waving a hand vaguely. "She says I forget to take it otherwise." I squeezed his hands. "Derek, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." For the next 30 minutes, I explained everything. Vivian's visit, the drugged coffee, Chloe's note, the lab results. As I spoke, Derek's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to a dawning horror. "No," he whispered when I finished. She couldn't. "I have proof," I said gently, "and I think you know, deep down, that something isn't right." He buried his face in his hands. "Chloe," he said suddenly, looking up with panic in his eyes, "if what you're saying is true, Chloe isn't safe. We'll protect her," I promised, "but first we need to get you help." I convinced Derek to go to the hospital, a different one than his regular doctor. There, blood tests confirmed what we already suspected. He had high levels of sedatives in his system, far more than any legitimate prescription would provide. While Derek was being treated, I called Iris. She arrived at the hospital within the hour, bringing with her a court order for temporary custody of Chloe. "The police are picking her up from school now," Iris explained. "She'll be brought here." Vivian has been temporarily barred from contact with both Derek and Chloe pending investigation. Relief washed over me like a wave. "Thank you," I whispered. Iris squeezed my shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Beatrice. Vivian won't go down without a fight." She was right. The next 3 weeks were a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and hospital visits. Derek slowly regained his strength as the drugs left his system. Chloe stayed with me, sleeping in the bedroom that had once been her father's. At night, I would hear her crying softly, and I would sit beside her bed, stroking her hair until she fell asleep. Vivian hired an expensive lawyer who claimed Derek had mental health issues that required medication. She produced prescription bottles with his name on them. She wept in court about how concerned she'd been, how hard she'd tried to help her troubled husband. But the evidence against her mounted. The lab found her fingerprints on the medication bottles, but the prescribing doctor had no record of Derek as a patient. Our security footage showed her searching through my house, and most damning of all, when the police searched their home, they found a notebook detailing her plans. How much of my estate she expected to inherit when Derek became sole owner after my decline, the renovations she would make to my house once it was hers. What they also found, hidden in a locked drawer in her closet, was a recently purchased life insurance policy on Derek. $2 million, with Vivian as the sole beneficiary. In the end, she took a plea deal rather than face a jury. 10 years for attempted murder, with additional charges for fraud and elder abuse. She would serve at least 7 before possibility of parole. I sat in the courtroom as she was led away, her perfect composure finally cracked. She looked back once, her eyes finding mine. There was no remorse there, only rage at having been caught. That was 6 months ago. Today, Derek and Chloe still live with me. The house that Roy built has enough room for all of us. And enough love, too. Derek is working again, teaching science at the local high school. Chloe is blooming, her smile returning as she feels safe again. Sometimes, on clear evenings, the 3 of us sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, the view that Roy loved so much, the home he built with his hands. "Do you think Dad would be happy we're all together?" Chloe asked me recently, her head resting against my shoulder. "I know he would," I told her, watching the last light gild the distant peaks. "This house was always meant for family." There are still difficult days. Derek struggles with guilt over not seeing what Vivian was doing. Chloe has nightmares sometimes, and I find myself checking the locks twice each night, peering into dark corners before I turn out the lights. But we're healing slowly, together. Yesterday morning, I made coffee for Derek and myself. As I handed him his cup, I saw him hesitate, just for a moment. Old fears die hard. "It's safe," I said quietly. "I promise." He nodded, took a sip, and smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I know, Mom. I trust you." Those words, simple as they were, felt like victory, like coming home after a long, dark journey. The truth hurt us all. But in the end, it saved us, too. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Because sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles is the greatest comfort of all.